While we've yet to visit most of the provinces of Tamriel in modern mainline games of the Elder Scrolls, each and every region has quite a bit of lore and history to dig into. But maybe the most elusive of all of them, and by extension one of the most compelling, is the land of the elves, Summerset Isles. Rumored to be the original home of the Aldmer, the ancient elves that spread all across Tamriel and evolved into multiple forms of Mer we see today, the province is located within the Abyssinian Sea, southwest of Tamriel itself. Summerset, while being the largest, is not the only island in the area, like many other notable ones like Aridon and Artaeum, each of which is also home to many elvish people known as the Altmeri or High Elves. These elvish people are the original descendants of the Aldmer, and as such hold themselves in very high regard due to their tall frames and exceptional use of magic, all stemming from what they see as a pure-blood race of people that should have rightful domination of others. The actual geography of the Summerset Isles consists of mostly warm climates, colorful idyllic forests and meadows, along with rolling hills and mountains that will cast a smile onto your face instantly. It's high fantasy at its best, and this is only further exemplified by the architecture, which is full of ornate glass and metalwork and interiors, enormous elegant towers everywhere you go, and pristine castles that almost look fake. Gardens are vibrant and full of yellow oleander, pearlwort, or glasswort, and animals can be seen trotting around in all directions, including Welva, Indrix, and the famous griffins. But sadly, in terms of first-hand accounts describing the region, especially from the races of man, they're hard to find. And that's because most of the history of Summerset has locked itself away from the rest of Tamriel, seldom allowing travelers to see it for themselves. And for those that have traveled to the Great Continent, they're shown nothing but the massive capital city of Alinor, a place that shows High Elf civilization in all its glory, with massive docks, castles, and hunting grounds that would make even a king jealous of the wealth. So most historical accounts of the region talk of Alinor mostly, along with some of the surrounding regions full of great spires like the Crystal Tower, which is one of many spots on the island that is host to powerful magics which are all studied at the Arcane University. There is so much here we don't know about as well, and considering that this is the birthplace of one of the most important races in the history of Nirn, I can't even imagine how much fascinating lore and history there must be here. What we do know is that during the First and Second eras, after the Aldmeri had established themselves in the Isles, there were many conflicts between man and Mer. In the First era, for example, the Altmer on Summerset were actually incorporated into the Second Empire, after which many locals became outraged and demanded their freedoms again. This eventually led to the forming of the First Aldmeri Dominion in the Second era between Summerset Isles, Valenwood, and elsewhere. The Dominion was in direct opposition to the humans' Daggerfall Covenant, and the two opposed each other for hundreds of years, eventually leading to a second Aldmeri Dominion as well. With time though, as always seems to happen in the Elder Scrolls, humanity somehow came out ahead, because as more and more trade networks were set up, and an integration of human races into Elvish society by the Third and Fourth eras, many of the younger generations of Altmer on Summerset began to question the xenophobia they had grown up with from their parents so much. To the younger High Elves, it seemed like maybe their blood right to land and power may not make so much sense after all, and maybe a more peaceful agreement with mankind would actually be more advantageous. These new modes of thought sprouted a great wedge between the youth and elderly of the region, and resulted in the formation of many shadowy groups like the Beautiful, who were a band of young educated artists and philosophers who sought to tear down the greatest monuments of Altmer civilization as an indication of a new rising tide. These terrorists, as the ruling elite saw them, were hunted down and killed or jailed when possible. But their movement lived on, as other strange and mysterious organizations like the Psijic Order also gained popularity with the youth, who all wanted new futures for their people, not so held back by tradition and history. In recent times though, after the Oblivion Crisis, the Aldmeri Dominion declared war against the Empire, nearly destroying it and winning their independence after Emperor Titus Mede II surrendered to them. And this is because the Dominion, along with the help of its shadowy cabal of secret operators known as the Thalmor, were able to not only best humanity, but drive out infighting between their own ranks, sending the Psijic Order into hiding. For those of you who have played the more modern Elder Scrolls games like Skyrim, you know that the Thalmor now have so much power that they oftentimes are referred to as being the puppet masters of the actual Summerset government, being the real commanders of the armies behind the scenes. And really, the reason I personally find the Summerset Isles so captivating is just how awesome all of this political turmoil and history is. Not only is Summerset obviously home to some of the most ancient lore and world building we could possibly uncover, most of which would give us more details on the histories of people we don't know nearly as much about as, say, the Imperials or Nords. But also, there are just so many fascinating events and places in the Summerset Isles we probably don't even know about yet. For example, are there Dwemer ruins still intact in the region come the end of the Fourth Era? What were the ancient Aldmer really like? What did they think and do? What were their customs and culture truly all about? So many fascinating questions that we still don't have answers to, all housed in a region that is full of majestic and advanced architecture and magics that would add a lot of flavor to the Elder Scrolls pantheon. And because I'm such a sucker for good mysteries, for me, Summerset would just be one of the most interesting places to go simply because of everything we could uncover. And while the Elder Scrolls Online can scratch that itch some for now, nothing can compare to a mainline Elder Scrolls entry and all that it has to offer. While every province in the Elder Scrolls is home to a variety of different geographical points of interest and cultures, maybe none do it better than a strong candidate for the Elder Scrolls 6 and one of the most compelling places in all of Tamriel, Hammerfell. Located on the western portion of the continent, between High Rock, Skyrim, and Cyrodiil, Hammerfell boasts a dizzying amount of biomes and ecosystems, ranging from temperate and tropical forests bursting with vibrant plant life and undiscovered species, serene coasts and subtropical beaches on the Iliac Bay, home to the oldest and most mysterious structures in all of Tamriel, to humid swamps, foreboding mountain ranges, thick jungles, and most prominently of all, the Grand Alakir Desert, spanning most of the province, which is characterized by its extremely arid climate, making it difficult to live in, and is the main reason so many on Tamriel refer to Hammerfell as the Deathlands. Or in other words, think of Hammerfell like a mix of Dune, classical medieval Europe and Japan, with a sprinkling of Greco-Roman influences throughout. Along with most prominently themes of North African Egyptian influence, truly unique for the Elder Scrolls setting. And when you tie this all together with hundreds of notable encampments and sprawling cities, Muslim-inspired architecture and themes, and countless wholly unique plants and animals like dune rippers or dragon frogs, you wind up with a place that is almost impossible not to fall in love with. And that's because it really just feels like Hammerfell has everything. But any amazing region like this wouldn't be complete without some utterly captivating lore behind it, and luckily for us, Hammerfell once again has some of the best out there. During the Dawn Era, it's been theorized that Tamriel was actually a much bigger landmass, all part of one supercontinent. And it was during this time that what is currently the modern-day continent of Yakuta was connected directly to the province of Hammerfell. As to what caused this great schism is hard to say, but it's been suggested that the changes occurred after a great war between the precursors, the El-Nefei, which resulted in them not only splitting the world itself, but also their own spirits into radically different racial and aboriginal groups, one of which became the Redguards, who originally became the inhabitants of the now drifting away landmass, Yakuta, and as you will soon see, will eventually become the heralds of Hammerfell itself. While the Redguards were away in the Merethic era on Yakuta, Hammerfell was mostly composed of the ancient Nedic peoples of the Craglorn, who were in constant conflict with the Aelids and Orcs in the region, somewhat similar to the situation we saw up north in High Rock. But during this time, another great force was at work in Hammerfell as well, that being the hyper-technologically advanced race of underground deep elves known as the Dwemer, who used tonal architecture and grand underground cities to gain control of space and time itself, but we'll have more to say about that in the final section of this video. Suffice to say, they are rumored to have created many huge structures and technological breakthroughs beneath the sands of Hammerfell. And it might be here that we can uncover some of the biggest secrets of many people's favorite mystery in all of the Elder Scrolls, the Dwemer race as a whole. Regardless though, the Dwemer were eventually driven out by giant goblin hordes invading underground. And while the Ancient Era has supplied a lot of interesting lore potential for Hammerfell itself, the true forging of what we know this nation as today did not begin until the First Era. Far to the west, across the Abyssinian Sea at this point, sat the continent of Yakuta, the same place that was once connected to Hammerfell long before, and in this region sat a conglomerate of islands that were home to some of the most interesting peoples and cultures in all of Nirn. Most notably of those were the Red Guards, a fearsome band of talented warriors who are quick to adopt new styles of armor or weaponry, whatever suits them best in their current environment. On Yakuta, they quickly gained dominance through warfare against multiple races and creatures we've never seen before in the Elder Scrolls. Most notably, the left-handed or Sinestral Elves, who based on Redguard folktales were said to use magic to raise cities of pure gold from the sands of Yakuta, creating architecture that would put anything we see in Tamriel to shame. Despite these elves' powers though, the Redguard people simply had better mastery of the arid climate of Yakuta, one even worse than Hammerfell, and were able to overpower the elves and subjugate them to their rule. This wouldn't last long, however, because due to some great natural disaster, either a tsunami, earthquake, or volcano eruptions, the entire continent of Yakuta began to sink into the ocean. And as a last-ditch effort to survive, all the Yakutans boarded their massive fleets of ships and began to sail across the ocean towards Tamriel, where they would make landfall in Hammerfell. Also, interesting side note by the way, not only had previous bands of Yakutans gone to the Tamrielic continent a little before this in search parties, but also there's a lot of compelling evidence in old historical texts that suggests this original sinking of Yakuta may have actually been caused by some great magics at the hands of the Sinestral Elves themselves, who may have seen it as the ultimate payback against a race of people who had subjugated them for so long. And considering how powerful the Sinestral magic was described as being, much more potent than even the abilities of the High Elves in Summerset, it could be feasible. Potentially they even made a pact with the Daedric gods, as the ultimate fall into evil to oppose the Red Guards. Whatever the true story is though, once the Red Guards made an initial landfall in Hammerfell in what is known as the Raw Gada invasion, they quickly decimated everything on sight. At the time, giant goblins littered the wastelands of the desert, and each and every one of them was cut down by Redguard steel as a slow push inland was made. Multiple other Yakutan invasion fleets started making landfall all over the province at this time, including around the Iliac Bay, along with many other fleets that would kill anything in sight. The Nedic peoples as a race were completely genocided, with most of their history and culture being erased from the pantheon of time. And soon, Redguards had complete control of most regions of Hammerfell, founding cities to rival their previous back on Yakuta. And as they became more situated in the region, their warfare did not end. As in the year 948 of the First Era, the Redguards signed a pact with King Jolie of Daggerfall, which started a joint campaign to siege and sack the Orcish city of Orsinium, the first of its kind. If it wasn't clear already, the Redguards were the most fearsome warriors in all of Tamriel, and their armies and weapons were a match for any force they came up against. However, as the First Era came to a close and the Second began, the Great Thracian Plague and Connaughton Flu took their toll in Hammerfell, like they did in so many other regions, resulting in thousands dead and many others being forced into hiding. Even during these times though, the Redguards continued to make alliances and wage war, leading up to the constellations of stars themselves literally falling from the sky in the Second Era and taking mortal form, summoning armies of Atronachs to combat the Redguards, who used the power of their great serpent god to wage otherworldly cosmological wars. And as if things couldn't get crazier and worse, the Imperial Empire began to take note of Hammerfell at this time, launching multiple invasions all the way into the Third Era, which eventually resulted in the fearsome Redguard people succumbing to the rule of the Tiber Septim Empire. Nowadays, in the modern-day Fourth Era, Hammerfell has fought off the Aldmeri Dominion invasions of the continent alongside Cyrodiil, and afterwards has fought to win its own independence with a very weakened warrior class of Redguards who long to see the days of where they controlled everything on the continent. And really, more than anything, there's just so much potential in where Hammerfell could go from here. It has a storied history of wars and conflicts, which we only touch the surface on here, along with so many distinct cultures and customs, even religions that we see nowhere else in Tamriel, along with some of the best potential for lore and ancient mysteries about some of the fan-favorite parts of the series. And this isn't even taking into account how diverse and massive the region is, with so many places to go and things to see that in many ways it could be argued that Hammerfell is actually the perfect candidate for an Elder Scrolls mainline game because it honestly would be able to check any kind of box for any kind of player. You could, for example, add sailing mechanics based around the Starfield ship mechanics in the Iliac Bay, create massive underground Dwemer structures in the sands of the desert for lore buffs, huge Muslim-inspired cities and architecture for those who want to explore and get immersed in the world, and small patches of jungles, coral reef coasts, and massive mountains near Skyrim for those who want to get a taste of something different. And it's for all of those reasons that I truly believe Hammerfell is one of the most compelling provinces in all of the Elder Scrolls series. One that could even give us some deeper background on the dawn of Nirn itself, about the formations of life in the continents, likely with many lore tombs about the Sinestral Elves or Yakuta, which are bound to be so fascinating to read about. And while as of writing this, we aren't quite sure what the province used in the Elder Scrolls 6 will be, if I was a betting man, I would say it's probably Hammerfell, and also, it would be the one I'm probably most excited about. And now what you all have been waiting for, the final, and in my opinion, most compelling province in all of Tamriel, in all of the Elder Scrolls. A setting that not only encompasses everything that makes the series great, but also a province that at one point quite literally saved Bethesda Game Studios from utter ruin, Morrowind. Situated east of Skyrim and Cyrodiil, and just north of the Black Marsh, Morrowind, also known as the Land of the Ash, is home of the Dunmer or Dark Elves. Very tribalistic and clannish by nature, the Dark Elves are most notable for their darker pigmented skin, which makes them stand out against other Mer, along with their fearsome qualities that make them great thieves, assassins, bowmen, and most famously, deadly destruction mages. This has resulted in many other races in Tamriel being fearful of the strange elves, despite how loyal and family-oriented they can be with one another. But maybe the most fascinating part about the Dunmer is actually how they were born, but we'll get to that. First of all, the region of Morrowind itself is covered from head to toe in utterly otherworldly flora and fauna, with many locations that sound like they're something out of a sci-fi horror setting rather than a fantasy world. In the south, you can find massive bug-adjacent creatures in the bogs and swamps, including shalks, mole crabs, and parapetons, all of which live in regions like Balfoyen, home to massive mushroom plants that grow as tall as trees. In the north is the famous lands of Vanderfell, the setting of the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, which is a large island in the middle of the continent, where at the middle sits the colossal volcano, Red Mountain, home of some of the coolest lore and stories in the Elder Scrolls. And really, all throughout Morrowind are just endless awesome things to find. For example, in the games, to travel around rather than using horse carriages, people ride on what are called slit striders, giant arthropods that can grow up to 20 feet tall or more, which are manipulated by exposing organs and tissues with special hooks that pull at the creature's flesh as they glide through the air. Or what about places like the Clockwork City, a steampunk-inspired metaphysical clockwork realm created by a wizard mystic god that is described as existing outside space and time itself, with many questioning how to even get there or if it's a real place. Or in other words, if there was one province in the Elder Scrolls you write lore for when you're on a bad LSD trip or you're getting bored of traditional fantasy tropes, you turn to Morrowind. And for that reason, it makes the province absolutely fascinating, especially when compared to everything else Tamriel has to offer. Because it doesn't even make sense how all of these things exist right next to other regions which seem so much more familiar. But it's not just the geography and life in Morrowind that makes it special. It's also the lore, which many players consider the most fascinating and best in the entire series. While we don't have much information on exactly what happened in Morrowind during the Dawn and Merethic eras, we do know that during this timeline, the ancient and powerful race of elves or dwarves, or whatever you want to call them, known as the Dwemer, built massive underground cities, as well as many monuments above ground that held many mysteries and great powers. During this time too, in the Summerset Isles, a dissident tribe of Aldmeri, known as the Chimer, had begun to split off from the teachings of the Aldmeri people. Led by a prophetic mystic known as Veloth, who claims to have spoken with Daedric gods who would champion them to a new existence in a faraway land. Veloth and his people sailed away from the seas at the Summerset Isles, and eventually found themselves in Morrowind, where they would over thousands of years evolve into the Dunmer race we know and love today. When the Chimer first arrived in Morrowind though, they immediately came into conflict with the locals, our lovable underground deep elves, the Dwemer. Disputes of land and religious teachings regularly led to conflict, as the Dwemer were an agnostic race that saw themselves as equal to the gods, while they worked on some of the most advanced technology Tamriel has ever seen, things that would dwarf even creations in the modern Fourth Era, that blurred the lines between science and magic itself. For the Chimer, these practices would have been sacrilege, but regardless, in the year 240 of the First Era, the two did come together in an alliance known as the First Council, in order to drive out the invading Nords from Skyrim to the north, who were hungry for more land after their successful conquests against the Snow Elves. This Dwemer-Chimer joint pact proved very successful, and for a time they both lived peacefully under the newly formed nation-state of Resdayn, which saw a period of great prosperity for both people over hundreds of years, with the Chimer ruling the lands above and the Dwemer remaining the kings of the underground. This peaceful time did not last forever though, as around the year 668 of the First Era, one of the most important events in Elder Scrolls history took place. The Chimer military leadership uncovered a plot by a high-ranking Dwemer sorcerer architect called Cagernak to use the Heart of Lorkhan to construct a colossal robotic construct that would reach into the sky and give the Dwemer instantaneous military dominance over all other races in Tamriel, along with making a laughingstock of the Daedric gods the Chimer worshipped. As a reminder for those of you who aren't caught up to speed, the Heart of Lorkhan is said to have been fired from a god's arrow into Red Mountain many millennia ago during the Dawn Era, after Lorkhan, an Aedric god himself, was slain by other Aedric gods for creating the mortal realm of Mundus, which is where all mortal life came to be on the planet of Nirn. And for his sin, his heart was forever locked away in the great volcano to never be touched again. Presumably the Dwemer, knowing of these folktales, had spent countless years hidden away under Red Mountain searching for the artifact. And when the Chimer uncovered that they had actually discovered it, all hell broke loose. Immediately, a full-on war broke out with Chimer forces charging head-on into battle with the Dwemer, who tried to hold out for as long as possible. But the Chimer military forces proved too strong, and in no time they had vanquished the Dwemer dwarf king Dunmak, which signaled that the fall of the Dwemer and their defeat at the hands of the Chimer was imminent. In a last-ditch effort of desperation, Cagernak used his carefully crafted tools to activate the Heart of Lorkhan, and in an instant, the entire race of Dwemer people in all of Morrowind, all of Tamriel, and all of Nirn disappeared. A massive white light filled the sky and blinded the Chimer for but moments. And as it started to dissipate, all that was left in its wake were thousands of empty underground Dwemer ruins, cities, and houses with absolutely no indication at all of what happened. To say this was a massive event for Morrowind, and really all of Tamriel, would be a huge understatement, as an entire race of people that was key to so much of the history of the early eras of the continent instantly was forever gone. Accounts during this time vary heavily from one historian to the next on exactly what happened and how other civilizations reacted. But regardless, it seems clear that Dwemer did something very powerful that resulted in their race never being seen again. Some of my personal favorite theories include the idea that the Dwemer were finally able to ascend to godhood like they always wanted, and with the Heart of Lorkhan were able to transport themselves into the realm of Oblivion to meet the gods face to face. Other theories include the idea that the Dwemer were sent forward or backward in time, or that they somehow all escaped into even deeper hidden tunnels in their cities and tricked everyone above ground. Either way, whatever the real story is, from this monumental time was born a new era for Morrowind, the founding of the Tribunal, which saw the Chimer turning away from some of their previous gods and slowly molding themselves into the Dunmer Dark Elves that we know now. This period in Dunmeri history saw many notable events. For example, in the Second Era, Morrowind formed the Ebonheart Pact with both the Nords and Argonians, which helped them to fight off Akaviri invasions and later fight in the Alliance War. But as time went on, things began to cool down, and by the rise of Tiber Septim's Third Empire, ambitions of conquest were fully fulfilled through diplomatic measures. More wars and conflicts sprouted out in all parts of the region at the time, and more people continued to migrate to the southern portions of the province due to geographical changes after the event at Red Mountain in the north. The slave trade in the south became rampant and a huge source of income for all in Morrowind, frequently using captured Argonians from the south to sell off to the highest bidder. And as you would expect, countless Dwemer underground ruins were found all over the region year after year, each proving yet again to be empty and devoid of answers. but allowed many historians to study their tonal architecture and strange technologies which are so advanced that even in modern-day Tamriel, no one has any idea just how powerful they are. In the modern timeline of Elder Scrolls now, the 4th era, following the Oblivion Crisis, both the Nords and Orcs have launched multiple attacks on Morrowind's northern borders, while in the south, an emboldened Argonian peoples are getting payback of their own. This has resulted in thousands of Dunmer refugees fleeing to nearby provinces for help, and has left Morrowind itself in a state of absolute chaos and anarchy, a truly tremendous fall from the days of Resdayn. But seeing as the Elder Scrolls 6 will most likely take place in the westernmost portions of Tamriel, the lands of Morrowind will likely not see any player eyes for quite some time. Regardless though, Morrowind really is, for me at least, the most compelling province in all of the Elder Scrolls. It has ancient lore and history about highly advanced proto-elves that literally can bend space and time, environments that look straight out of a horror movie, interesting cultures and religions that all vie against one another, and many events that are so important they affect every other province in Tamriel. And what more could you ask for a province than that?